Hello everyone. In this episode of my series of short videos on useful advanced English vocabulary, we're looking at the C2 level conjunction albeit. Albeit. So yeah, that's the pronunciation, but to be honest, you're probably never going to have to pronounce this word because it's pretty formal and we most commonly use it in writings, in quite formal writings. So it's very useful. As I said, it's C2 level, so it's really useful for your formal writing tasks in the Cambridge English exams, or any English exams, of course, but we focus on the Cambridge English exams on this channel. So yeah, if it's your essay, report, proposal, any formal writing task, you can use albeit. But I wanted to focus on this word today because I've noticed that my students often use it incorrectly. And that's understandable because if you look up this word in a dictionary or on the internet, you often get a confusing or a misleading definition. For example, on Google, the only definition you see is though. And that's not entirely correct. I mean, it is partly correct, but it doesn't tell the whole story. So if you see that definition and you just use albeit in the same way you use though in your writings, it's very possible you're going to make mistakes. And I'm going to explain why in this video. But as I said, it's a conjunction of contrast. So very much like although, even though, in spite of, despite, it's used to contrast the information. So in the same sentence. But, and this is very important, you can only use albeit before nouns or noun phrases, adjectives or adjective phrases, or adverbs or adverb phrases, of course. In a moment, we're going to look at some common mistakes that I've observed students make with albeit when they kind of use it as a direct alternative to those other conjunctions of contrast. But first, let's look at some good examples. He did the task well, albeit slowly. So he did the task well, albeit slowly. So you have this contrast. He did the task well, that's good, right? But also slowly, so albeit slowly. So that's contrasting the two pieces of information there. They are positive measures, albeit insufficient. So here we're using an adjective. In the previous example, we used an adverb, slowly. Here it's insufficient, an adjective. So they are positive measures, that's good, but they're insufficient, so albeit insufficient. And one more example with a noun phrase this time. She passed her exam, albeit by the minimum score. So she passed her exam, great, albeit by the minimum score. So in those examples, yes, you can use although, even though, and though in a slightly different structure, but really albeit means although it be, although it is. And this is where people make mistakes, because something that you must remember when using albeit is that you can't use it with independent clauses. Okay, you cannot use albeit with independent clauses. Now, in case you've forgotten or if you don't know, an independent clause is a group of words which can form a sentence on their own. So they contain a verb and a subject, basically. So you can take this independent clause out of the whole sentence and it can form a sentence on its own. When we look at the examples, I'm sure you'll understand it more clearly, but that's the rule that you must remember because that's the most common mistake I see students make with albeit. So let's look at some examples of mistakes that students often make. She passed the exam, albeit she didn't practice the writing part. No, that's an independent clause. She didn't pass the writing part. That could be a sentence on its own, right? So you can't use albeit there. You can use although, so you could say she passed the exam although she didn't practice the writing part, or even though, or she didn't practice the writing part though. All those sentences are perfectly correct, but not with albeit. Let's look at another incorrect use of albeit. They are positive measures, albeit they are insufficient. Hopefully that just sounds wrong to you instinctively, but they are positive measures, albeit they are insufficient. No, that's an independent clause. That's it could be a sentence, right, on its own. They are insufficient. So again, you could say they are positive measures, although they are insufficient, or even though they are insufficient, or they are insufficient though, but not albeit they are insufficient. So that's a rule you need to remember when you're writing your essays or reports or proposals. If you realize you're using albeit with an independent clause, it's incorrect. And you have lots of alternatives, right? All the conjunctions of contrast I've already mentioned in this video, and I've also made a whole video on conjunctions of contrast. But it's a very good word to use in your writings because it will give you extra marks if you use it correctly. Okay, so start practicing, and I'll see you very soon for another video.